here when we talk about asset dynamic is the scale score. Right, so what's a scale score? Why do we do scale score? We've always done scoring. What is so scaled scoring about this, right? So we know that when we have given tests or when anybody gives tests, we get a score. The score tells us how much did you get correct out of the total number of marks that was that the test was for. So you get let's say 40 on 50, right? Now this is typically called the raw score, which basically means that there were 50 questions, let's assume for a simplistic sake, each question carried 1 mark. So there were 50 questions in the test, 50 mark test, and this particular student answered 40 questions correctly, so 40 on 50. That's a raw score, right? Now this gives us some information about the student's performance in the test, right? Now there could be a case where there are multiple students who are scoring 40 on 50, right? It is not necessary that all of those students got the same set of questions correct. Some of them would have got some more easy questions correct, some of them could have got some difficult questions correct, and both landed up with 40 questions right. Now if we want to distinguish between the performance of these students, a raw score is not enough to be able to distinguish the performance of these students. And that is where the idea of the scaled score, kind of comes in, right? Now, what the scaled score does is to be able to give each student almost a unique score on the test, right? And the unique score kind of is a representation in some way of the ability of the student for that particular test, right? Now, what do we mean by this? Right, so even though there are, let's say me and Ramya got 40 on 50 on the test, Ramya answered some of the difficult questions correctly to come to 40 on 50, and Aarti answered some of the easier questions correctly but got some of those difficult questions incorrect to arrive on 40 on 50. Right, now we need to have a way to differentiate that Ramya got some of those difficult questions right? So the scale score, when it gets calculated for Ramya will get a higher scale score than what Aarti is going to get, right? So from that point of view, anybody who is looking at the score can see that, oh, the student with this higher score, Ramya, in this case had a better performance on the test as compared to another student with a lower score on this particular test. Now this is a pretty common thing that multiple tests kind of use. For example, if you take your GRE, you take your GMAT, right, all of these kind of use this concept of scale scores to arrive at discriminating the performance of different students, right? Because at certain test levels you really need to discriminate and find out the real cream of cream students, and these kind of statistical methods kind of help us do that. Now coming to asset and talking about how is the scale score calculated, right? So for every question that is used in an asset dynamic test, we have past student performance data of these questions. Now using this past student data of performance data on these questions, we calculate values of 2 parameters for every question. One is what is the difficulty level of this question, and 2 is what is the discrimination ability of this particular question, right? Now difficulty, we understand something is easy, medium, hard. These are very discrete units of difficulty, but if you look at difficulty as a continuous range and then spot and put a point on that range saying this question is at this difficulty level, right? That's what the difficulty level is going to talk about. The second thing is the discrimination ability of a particular question. Is this questions able to discriminate between students who are high performers who will still get this right versus those who may not get this right? So that is the discrimination ability. Now when a student is taking a test on asset dynamic, right, we get all the responses to all the questions. We feed the responses and we feed the difficulty level rating and the discrimination score of every question with the responses to a statistical model, the IRT model, right? And that gives an output which is called the scale score, and that scale score is in the range of 200 to 800, right? 200 kind of indicates that the student did not get anything right or got extremely few questions right, and an 800 on the other end indicates the student almost maxed the test, right? So that's the range in which students get their scale score. Another thing that we do in asset dynamic is to benchmark the students, like even on pen and paper, we do benchmark the students. Now, what is benchmarking? We covered. It's basically a relative ranking of where the student stands. Right now, in the case of asset dynamic, this benchmarking number is derived based on the scale score that the student got. Right. So, if somebody has got a very high scale score, then they are going to get a high percentile in the asset test. They are doing pretty well. Somebody who got a very low scale score is going to get a low percentile on the asset test, right? So that's how the benchmarking is calculated. And even in the pen and paper rounds, starting with the winter 2023 round, we have now done the benchmarking based on the scale scores as compared to benchmarking done based on the raw scores. And we see that when you do the benchmarking based on the scale score, it's far more authentic and far more reliable from a school's point of view in terms of understanding where a student or a school stands relative to the cohort that has taken the test. So that's about scale scores and how we arrive at the benchmarking based on the scale score.